Imagine a world where your physical perfection marks you for a fate worse than death, where your youthful beauty becomes a target painted on your back, where being born with the face of an angel condemns you to a life of unimaginable suffering. This was the reality for countless young boys throughout history, boys whose only crime was being born beautiful, in a world that saw male beauty as a commodity to be harvested, traded, and consumed. At 12 years old, you only know that the men in fine robes have chosen you for your smooth skin, your delicate features, your beauty, that everyone in your village has always remarked upon. But as the cart wheels creak beneath you, carrying you away from everything familiar, you begin to realize that your beauty isn't the blessing everyone said it was. It's a curse that will define every moment of your remaining life. Today we live in a society obsessed with beauty, where physical perfection opens doors and creates opportunities. We spend billions on cosmetics, surgery, and treatments to enhance our appearance. But what if I told you that in ancient times, if you were a beautiful peasant boy, your looks were more of a condemnation than a gift? What if your perfect features, your unblemished skin, your graceful movements weren't signs of good fortune, but markers that would single you out for a life of servitude, abuse, and psychological torment? The practice of selecting young boys to serve as male concubines spans cultures and centuries, from the imperial courts of China to the Ottoman harems, from the Byzantine palaces to the hidden chambers of wealthy merchants across the ancient world. These weren't random selections. They were systematic, calculated processes designed to identify and harvest the most beautiful boys from the most vulnerable populations. The criteria were specific, the inspection methods were thorough, and the ultimate fate of these children was sealed the moment they were deemed suitable for their new roles. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please, comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The morning sun barely touches the horizon when they come to your village. The selection parties arrive without warning, their presence announced only by the sound of horses' hooves on cobblestones and the jingle of coins in leather pouches. These aren't common raiders or bandits. These are professionals, men who have perfected the art of human evaluation over decades of service to emperors, sultans, and wealthy patrons whose appetites demand only the finest specimens. In the Ottoman Empire, the practice reached levels of sophistication that would make modern human trafficking operations seem crude by comparison. The Devshirme system, officially designed to recruit Christian boys for the Janissary Corps, had a darker parallel in the selection of boys for the imperial harem. These selectors, known as subasha, moved through the villages of the Balkans like skilled hunters, their eyes trained to spot the subtle markers of extraordinary beauty among the peasant children. The boy they're examining today is 13 years old. His name is Mikhail, and he doesn't yet understand why the strange man keeps touching his face, turning his head to catch the light, running rough fingers along his jawline. The selector's hands are cold, clinical, as they trace the boy's features with the precision of a jeweler examining a precious stone. Every detail matters: the curve of the lips, the arch of the eyebrows, the delicate structure of the nose, the way the morning light catches the golden highlights in his brown hair. "Open your mouth," the selector commands in broken Slavic, his accent thick with the authority of the imperial court. Mikhail's trembling lips part, revealing teeth that are straight and white, unmarked by the decay that afflicts so many peasant children. The selector nods approvingly, making notes on a piece of parchment that will determine this boy's fate. Perfect teeth were essential. Damaged or missing teeth would mark a boy as unsuitable for the refined palates of imperial patrons. The examination continues with methodical thoroughness. The selector runs his hands through Mikhail's hair, checking for lice, examining the scalp for signs of disease or scarring. Hair quality was crucial. It needed to be thick, lustrous, free from parasites. In the imperial harem, a boy's hair would be perfumed with expensive oils, styled with precious ornaments, and used as a canvas for the artistic expressions of court estates. "Remove your shirt," comes the next command, and Mikhail's mother, standing nearby with tears streaming down her face, makes a small sound of protest before being silenced by a guard's stern look. The boy's torso is revealed, pale, unmarked by scars, with the smooth skin that comes from youth and good nutrition. The selector's hands map every inch of exposed flesh, checking for birthmarks, scars, or other imperfections that might diminish the boy's value. The process is designed to be humiliating, to establish immediately the power dynamic that will define the boy's entire future existence. Every touch, every examination, every clinical evaluation serves to transform the child from a human being into a commodity. The selector's hands move with practiced efficiency, checking muscle tone, testing flexibility, examining the boy's posture and carriage. Walk, the selector orders, and Mikhail is forced to parade back and forth while the man observes his gait, his natural grace, the way he carries himself. Grace was another essential quality. In the imperial courts, these boys would be expected to move like dancers, to embody an ideal of masculine beauty that was both powerful and delicate, commanding yet submissive. The psychological examination is more subtle but equally important. The selector engages Mikhail in conversation, testing his intelligence, his ability to learn, his natural temperament. A boy who is too aggressive might resist training, while one who is too passive might lack the spark that makes him interesting to his future owners. The ideal candidate possessed a combination of intelligence, beauty, and psychological malleability that would allow him to be shaped into whatever his masters desired. In the Chinese imperial court, the selection process followed different but equally rigorous protocols. The eunuch administrators who supervised these selections had their own specialized vocabulary for describing the qualities they sought. A boy's eyes might be described as autumn water if they possessed the right combination of clarity and depth. His skin might be praised as white jade if it had the proper luminous quality. His movements might be called flowing silk if they demonstrated the right combination of grace and control. The Chinese selectors paid particular attention to hands and feet, believing that small, delicate extremities were signs of noble character and aesthetic refinement. They would spend long minutes examining a boy's fingers, testing their flexibility, observing the shape of his nails, the smoothness of his palms. Feet were equally important. They needed to be well proportioned, unblemished, with toes that were neither too long nor too short. Voice quality was another crucial factor. The selectors would have boys speak, recite poetry, or sing simple songs, listening for the clarity and pitch that would be enhanced through training. A boy whose voice was too deep might be rejected, while one whose voice was too thin might be deemed unsuitable for the sophisticated acoustic environments of the imperial court. The Byzantine Empire had its own elaborate system for selecting boys for the imperial court. These selectors, often former palace eunuchs themselves, understood intimately what their masters desired. They looked for boys who embodied the classical Greek ideal of male beauty, the proportions celebrated in ancient sculpture, the harmony of features that spoke to philosophical ideals about the relationship between physical and spiritual perfection. Byzantine selectors paid particular attention to the boy's profile, believing that the line from forehead to nose to chin revealed essential character traits. They examined the ears for proper proportion and placement, the neck for length and grace, the shoulders for breadth and symmetry. Every detail was evaluated according to aesthetic principles that had been refined over centuries of practice. The ideal candidate would possess what the court poets called the soul of a gazelle, gentle, graceful, alert, but ultimately submissive to the will of his betters. The age range for selection was carefully calculated. Boys who were too young might not survive the rigors of training and transport, while those who were too old might have already developed personality traits that would make them difficult to mold. The ideal age was typically between 10 and 14, when boys retained the androgynous beauty of childhood while possessing enough physical and mental development to begin their training. Physical health was paramount, but not in the way modern people might expect. The selectors weren't looking for robust peasant strength or the hardy constitution that would serve a boy well in agricultural labor. Instead, they sought a more refined kind of health, the delicate constitution that would respond well to the specialized diet, exercise, and medical care that would be provided in the imperial courts. The selection process often took days or even weeks as the evaluators moved through villages and towns, examining hundreds of boys before choosing the handful who met their exacting standards. The rejected boys would be sent home, often traumatized by the experience but at least free to resume their normal lives. The chosen ones would begin a journey that would transform them completely, erasing their former identities and replacing them with new personas crafted to serve the desires of their owners. The economic aspect of the selection process was never far from the surface. These boys represented significant investments. The costs of acquisition, transport, training, and maintenance were substantial. The selectors understood that their choices would be evaluated not just on aesthetic grounds, but on practical considerations of return on investment. A boy who failed to meet expectations after costly training would reflect poorly on the selector's judgment. The religious and cultural contexts varied across different civilizations, but the underlying logic remained consistent. These boys were being selected to serve as living embodiments of idealized male beauty, to fulfill roles that combined elements of companionship, entertainment, and sexual service. The selection process was designed to identify boys who could be transformed into these roles while maintaining the psychological stability necessary to function in the complex social environments of elite courts. The documentation of these selection processes provides chilling insight into the systematic nature of this form of human trafficking. Official records detail the criteria used, the methods employed, the success rates of different selection strategies. These weren't impulsive crimes of opportunity, but carefully organized operations that treated children as commodities to be evaluated, purchased, and processed. The moment of selection marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. The boys who were chosen would be taken from their families, often never to return or even to see their homeland again. They would be given new names, new identities, new purposes. Their original selves would be systematically erased and replaced with personas designed to serve the needs and desires of their new owners. The psychological trauma of this process cannot be overstated. These children were being torn from everything familiar and thrust into a world where their value was determined entirely by their ability to please others. The selection process itself was designed to break down their sense of individual identity and replace it with an understanding of themselves as property, as objects created for the pleasure and convenience of their masters. The families of selected boys experienced their own form of trauma. In some cases, they were compensated for their loss, receiving payments that might represent more money than they had ever seen. But no amount of gold could truly compensate for the loss of a child, for the knowledge that their son would be subjected to experiences that no parent could bear to imagine. The selectors themselves were often products of the same system they now served. Many were former concubines who had managed to survive and advance within the palace hierarchy. Their intimate knowledge of what was required made them particularly effective at identifying suitable candidates, but it also meant they understood exactly what fate awaited the boys they chose. The transportation of selected boys was another carefully orchestrated process. They would be moved in small groups, often disguised as merchant caravans or religious pilgrims to avoid attracting attention. The journey itself was part of the conditioning process. The boys were removed from familiar surroundings, isolated from anyone who might provide emotional support, and gradually accustomed to their new status as property. During transport, the boys would begin to receive their first lessons in their new roles. They might be taught basic phrases in the language of their destination, introduced to new customs and expectations, and begin the process of physical conditioning that would continue throughout their training. The goal was to arrive at their destination with boys who were already beginning to adapt to their new circumstances. The selection process for male concubines represents one of the most systematic and sophisticated forms of human trafficking in history. It combined elements of aesthetic evaluation, psychological assessment, economic calculation, and social engineering to create a supply chain that fed the desires of the most powerful people in the world. The boys who were caught in this system lost their freedom, their families, their original identities, and often their lives in service to the appetites of their masters. The records that survive from these selection processes provide evidence of the cold calculation that drove this trade in human beings. The detailed criteria, the systematic evaluation methods, the careful documentation of success and failure rates, all of this points to a level of organization and efficiency that would be impressive if it weren't so horrifying. The legacy of these selection processes extends far beyond the individuals who were directly affected. They represent a systematic dehumanization of children, a reduction of human beings to their commercial value, and a normalization of sexual exploitation that echoes through history. Understanding how these systems operated, how they were justified, and how they were eventually abolished provides crucial insight into the ongoing struggle against human trafficking and child exploitation. The boys who were selected for these roles were not volunteers or willing participants. They were children who were identified, evaluated, and processed according to criteria that treated them as commodities rather than human beings. Their stories serve as a reminder of the capacity for systematic cruelty that exists within human societies, and the importance of vigilance against systems that reduce people to their utility value. The selection process was just the beginning of a transformation that would completely reshape these boys' lives. The criteria used to identify suitable candidates, the methods employed to evaluate them, and the systematic nature of the entire operation reveal the sophisticated planning and organization that went into this form of human trafficking. The boys who were chosen would face challenges that would test every aspect of their humanity, and their survival would depend on their ability to adapt to circumstances that no child should ever have to endure. The inspection, clinical evaluation of human merchandise. The holding chambers beneath the imperial palace are lit by flickering oil lamps, their light casting dancing shadows on stone walls that have witnessed this ritual countless times before. The air is thick with incense, meant to mask the smell of fear and desperation that clings to every surface. Here in these underground rooms, the selected boys await the final inspection that will determine their fate within the palace hierarchy. Ahmad is 14 years old, his olive skin unmarked by the sun that has darkened the faces of his farming family for generations. He stands naked in the center of the chamber, his arms at his sides, trying to control the trembling that threatens to overwhelm him. Around him, other boys wait in similar poses, their eyes reflecting the same mixture of terror and resignation that he feels coursing through his own body. The chief examiner enters the chamber with the measured steps of a man who has performed this ritual thousands of times. His robes are silk, his hands soft with the privilege of palace life, but his eyes are hard with the accumulated cruelty of decades spent evaluating human merchandise. Behind him walk his assistants, each carrying instruments and documents that will be used to catalogue every aspect of the boy's physical and psychological condition. "You," the chief examiner points at Ahmad, his voice carrying the authority of someone who has never been questioned or disobeyed. "Step forward." Ahmad's feet move without conscious thought, his body obeying even as his mind screams in protest. The examination begins with his head, the examiner's fingers probing through his hair with the same detached precision a farmer might use to examine a horse at market. Every strand is checked for texture, thickness, and color. The examiner pulls sharply, testing the strength of the roots, nodding with satisfaction when the hair doesn't break or come loose. "Excellent quality," the examiner murmurs to his assistant, who makes a note on his parchment. "The color is particularly fine. It will take dyes well for special occasions." The examination of Ahmad's face is conducted with the intensity of a gemologist studying a precious stone. The examiner's hands turn the boy's head to catch the light from different angles, his fingers tracing the bone structure beneath the skin. He measures the distance between Ahmad's eyes with small metal calipers, the cold instruments pressing against sensitive skin as he records proportions that will determine the boy's value. "Open your mouth," comes the command, and Ahmad's lips part to reveal teeth that are straight and white. The examiner uses a small metal probe to check each tooth individually, testing for decay, measuring the evenness of the bite, examining the gums for signs of disease. The probe scrapes against Ahmad's teeth, making him want to gag, but he forces himself to remain still. The assistant records the findings. Dental structure excellent, no signs of decay or malformation. Bite alignment perfect. Gums healthy and well-colored. These details matter because the boy's mouth will be used for purposes that require perfect condition, and any imperfection could diminish his value or limit his utility. The examination continues with Ahmad's throat, the examiner's fingers pressing against his neck to feel the structure of his larynx. He forces the boy to make various sounds, testing the quality and pitch of his voice. The examiner listens carefully to each vocalization, his trained ear detecting subtleties that will indicate how the boy's voice might develop and what roles he might be suited for. Speak, the examiner commands, and Ahmad finds his voice catching in his throat. I said speak. The command comes again, sharper this time, and Ahmad manages to whisper his name, his voice cracking with fear and the strain of the examination. The examiner nods approvingly at the sound. Good clarity, pleasant tone. The pitch is ideal for our purposes. This one will respond well to voice training. The assistant makes another note, and Ahmad realizes that even his voice is being evaluated as a commodity, a tool that will be refined and used for the pleasure of his future masters. The physical examination moves to Ahmad's torso, the examiner's hands mapping every inch of exposed skin. He checks for scars, birthmarks, or other imperfections that might diminish the boy's aesthetic value. His fingers probe the muscle tone, testing flexibility and strength. The examination is thorough and invasive, treating Ahmad's body as an object to be catalogued rather than as the flesh of a frightened child. Excellent skin quality, the examiner notes, his fingers pinching and stretching Ahmad's skin to test its elasticity. No scarring, good muscle tone for his age. The complexion is ideal, light enough to be considered exotic but dark enough to be interesting. This one will be popular with the Eastern courtiers. The examination of Ahmad's hands is conducted with particular attention to detail. The examiner measures the length of each finger, tests the flexibility of the joints, examines the nails for shape and health. He forces Ahmad to make various gestures, observing the grace and elegance of his hand movements. In the palace, these hands will be required to perform delicate tasks, to serve tea with perfect precision, to provide massage and caresses that require both skill and sensitivity. The examiner's attention turns to Ahmad's feet, repeating the same detailed evaluation. He measures the arch, tests the flexibility of the toes, examines the skin for calluses or other signs of hard labor. The boy's feet are deemed satisfactory, small enough to be considered delicate, well-proportioned and unmarked by the kind of heavy work that would indicate unsuitability for palace life. Turn around, the examiner commands, and Ahmad slowly rotates, knowing that every part of his body is being evaluated and catalogued. The examiner examines his back, checking for the straightness of his spine, the symmetry of his shoulders, the curve of his lower back. He tests the flexibility of Ahmad's joints, bending and stretching the boy's limbs to determine his range of motion. The psychological evaluation begins with a series of questions designed to test Ahmad's intelligence, his ability to learn, and his natural temperament. The examiner asks about his family, his education, his dreams and fears. But these aren't questions born from genuine interest. They're part of a systematic evaluation designed to determine how easily the boy can be molded to serve his new masters. "What is your greatest fear?" the examiner asks, his voice carrying a tone of false kindness that makes Ahmad's skin crawl. The boy hesitates, unsure how to answer, afraid that any response might be used against him. "Answer me," the examiner's voice hardens, and Ahmad whispers that he fears never seeing his family again. The examiner nods and makes a note. Good. Fear of abandonment indicates strong family bonds, which suggests capacity for emotional attachment. This can be redirected toward his masters with proper training. Ahmad realizes with growing horror that even his deepest fears are being analyzed and catalogued as tools that can be used to control him. The examiner tests Ahmad's ability to follow instructions, giving him a series of increasingly complex commands and observing how quickly and accurately he complies. He watches for signs of defiance or resistance, making notes about the boy's natural submissiveness or potential for rebellion. Every response is evaluated through the lens of how it will affect the boy's utility as a concubine. Raise your right hand. Now touch your left ear. Now kneel. Now stand and turn in a circle. Each command is obeyed, but the examiner is watching for more than simple compliance. He's observing the grace of Ahmad's movements, the speed of his comprehension, the way he holds his body when receiving orders. All of these details will determine the boy's training regimen and his ultimate placement within the palace hierarchy. The examiner produces a small vial of perfumed oil and applies it to Ahmad's skin, testing how the boy's natural scent combines with the artificial fragrance. He observes the color of the oil against Ahmad's skin, making notes about which perfumes and cosmetics will be most effective in enhancing his natural beauty. The boy's skin is treated as a canvas that will be painted and decorated according to the aesthetic preferences of his future masters. Excellent absorption, the examiner notes. The skin takes oils well, and the natural scent is pleasing. This one will respond well to cosmetic enhancement. Ahmad feels sick as he realizes that his body is being evaluated like a piece of fabric, tested for its ability to hold dyes and decorations. The examination includes tests of Ahmad's pain tolerance, disguised as medical procedures, but actually designed to determine how much discomfort he can endure without breaking. The examiner uses needles to test sensitivity, applies pressure to various parts of his body, and watches for signs of weakness or excessive reaction. These tests serve a dual purpose. They identify boys who might not survive the rigors of palace training, and they provide information about how much physical discipline each boy can tolerate. Good pain tolerance. The examiner notes as Ahmad manages not to cry out when a needle pricks his skin. This one can handle the more demanding aspects of training without psychological damage. The casual nature of this observation chills Ahmad to the bone, as he realizes that his capacity to suffer is being evaluated as a positive trait. The final phase of the examination involves testing Ahmad's natural reflexes and responses to different types of touch. The examiner's hands move across the boy's body with clinical precision, noting which areas are most sensitive, which touches produce the strongest reactions, and how quickly the boy adapts to different sensations. This information will be used to develop specialized training programs designed to enhance his responsiveness to his future master's desires. Throughout the examination, Ahmad struggles to maintain his sense of self, to remember that he is more than the sum of his physical attributes. But the systematic nature of the evaluation, the way every aspect of his being is reduced to notes on a parchment, gradually erodes his sense of individual identity. He begins to see himself through the examiner's eyes, not as a person with hopes and dreams, but as a collection of valuable traits that can be refined and exploited. The other boys in the chamber undergo similar examinations, each evaluation tailored to their individual characteristics but following the same basic pattern. Some boys are found to have defects that reduce their value. A slight scar, a missing tooth, a temperament that suggests they might be difficult to train. These boys are marked for lesser roles or in some cases rejected entirely and sent away from the palace. The boys who pass the initial inspection are divided into categories based on their potential roles within the palace hierarchy. Those with the most exceptional beauty and the most malleable temperaments are marked for training as personal concubines to the highest-ranking officials. Others are designated for more specialized roles, entertainers, servants, or companions for lower-ranking members of the court. Ahmad is marked with the highest classification, his exceptional beauty and apparent psychological suitability, making him a candidate for the most elite training programs. The examiner's final notes describe him as exceptional material with high potential for advanced training. Ahmad doesn't understand the significance of this designation, but he will learn soon enough that his beauty has condemned him to a fate that is both privileged and horrific. The documentation process is meticulous, with detailed records being maintained of every aspect of each boy's evaluation. These records will follow the boys throughout their training and service, providing their handlers with detailed information about their physical and psychological characteristics. The bureaucracy of exploitation is as thorough as any modern corporate system, with forms, classifications, and tracking systems that ensure no detail is overlooked. The examiner's assistant produces a set of metal tags, each inscribed with a number and a symbol indicating the boy's classification. These tags are attached to chains that are placed around the boys' necks, marking them as property of the palace and providing a quick reference for their handlers. Ahmad's tag bears the highest classification symbol, a mark that will determine every aspect of his future life. The holding chambers fall silent as the examination concludes, and the boys are left to contemplate their fate. Some weep quietly, others stare into space with the blank expression of those who have retreated into themselves to escape an unbearable reality. Ahmad finds himself caught between terror and a strange sense of relief. The uncertainty is over, his fate is decided, and now he can only wait to see what that fate will bring. The examiner's final report summarizes the day's work with the cold efficiency of a merchant cataloging inventory. 17 boys examined, 14 approved for training, 3 rejected due to various defects. The quality of this selection is exceptionally high, with several candidates showing potential for the highest levels of service. recommend immediate commencement of training programs to maximize return on investment. The clinical language of the report strips away any pretense that these are human beings rather than merchandise. The boys have been reduced to numbers, classifications, and potential return on investment. Their individual personalities, their hopes and fears, their connections to family and home, all of this has been erased in favor of an evaluation that treats them as objects to be refined and exploited. The inspection process represents the final transformation of these boys from human beings into property. They entered the chamber as children with names, families, and individual identities. They leave as numbered assets with assigned roles and predetermined futures. The systematic nature of this dehumanization, the clinical precision with which it is conducted, makes it all the more horrifying. The boys who have passed the inspection are led away to begin their training, their chains clanking softly as they walk. Behind them, the examination chamber is cleaned and prepared for the next group of boys who will undergo the same process. The cycle continues, feeding the insatiable appetite of the palace for beautiful young men who can be molded into whatever their masters desire. The examination process serves multiple purposes within the broader system of sexual slavery. It identifies the most valuable candidates, provides detailed information for training programs, and begins the psychological conditioning that will make the boys more compliant and easier to control. Every aspect of the process is designed to maximize the utility of the human merchandise while minimizing the risk of resistance or rebellion. The records kept during these examinations provide historians with detailed insight into the systematic nature of this exploitation. The careful documentation, the standardized procedures, the classification systems, all of this points to a level of organization and efficiency that treats human trafficking as a legitimate business enterprise. The boys who are subjected to these examinations were not random victims but carefully selected candidates for a system that had been refined over centuries of practice. The psychological impact of the examination process cannot be overstated. These boys were stripped of their dignity, their privacy, and their sense of individual worth in a single session. They were reduced to their physical attributes and their potential utility, with no consideration given to their emotional needs or their human rights. The trauma of this experience would mark them for life, shaping their understanding of their own value and their place in the world. The examination process represents one of the most systematic and dehumanizing aspects of the concubine trade. It combined medical evaluation, psychological assessment, and commercial appraisal into a single procedure that treated children as merchandise to be catalogued and processed. The boys who underwent this examination would carry its effects with them throughout their lives, forever marked by the knowledge that they had been reduced to nothing more than the sum of their physical attributes and their potential utility to others.